Well, today we're kind of taking an excursion in Daniel. We're doing this excursion, looking into the other reasons why Daniel may have gone into the den of lions. So, and then next week we're going to go back to the Aramaic text, so that way we'll have both pictures. So this one really concerns. It shows how Daniel kind of exposed some of the leadership, and so they kind of want to get back at him, which we know is very typical human nature to kind of want to do that sort of thing. So I'm here. I'm not operating at 100% steam, so bear with me. So I mean, I don't feel anywhere like I did earlier, so don't. Hey. Thank you. Yeah. So we're going over. It's a portion called Bel and the Snake or Bel and the Dragon. It's part of the Greek text, and so it's not in our Bibles. It is in the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox, and it's in our apocryphal books. But it's quite an interesting story, and if you've never heard it or came across it, I don't know. It's kind of neat, and so it's kind of worth going into. The lesson's a bit long because the text is printed in the lesson itself, because most of us don't have the apocryphal books. So, so this portion of the Greek Old Testament's called Bel and the Snake. Bel is really the name for the Babylonian god Marduk. So you think, well, why don't they just call him Marduk? But no, I guess it's the same reason why God is Yahweh, Almighty, Elohim. I mean, there's multiple names for God, and so it's not strange in itself that there may be other names on how someone refers to their God. So that's just to let you know that Bel is, okay? And we could kind of see some of this like Nebuchadnezzar, right? You go, well, what does that mean, right? Well, that means, so in kind of this Babylonian kind of pantheon of gods, Nebo was the son of Bel. So Nebuchadnezzar, he's named after Nebo. So I guess if we wanted kind of an analogy, it would be like when, let's say, a Spanish person names his son Jesus, right? Which in Spanish culture is okay. No one would do it in English because you'd go like, you named your son Jesus? Like, wow, that's an impossible name to live up to. But in Latin culture, it's not crazy like we would think. So, but yeah. So Nebuchadnezzar has that kind of tie-in, right? So and so if we look in Isaiah and Jeremiah, we could kind of see these other references. So this is the middle of page 1. This is what the Lord says to the people of Israel. Bel bows down, Nebo stoops low. Idols depicting them are consigned to beasts and cattle. The images you carry are loaded as a burden for the weary animal. So, we can see other mentions of the Babylonian god Bel and how the Israelites, when they would kind of go off into various forms of idolatry, who knows, they would get involved in a lot of stuff. Okay? From Jeremiah, the word of the Lord spoke against Babylon, against the land of the Chaldeans, through Jeremiah the prophet. Babylon will be captured. Bel will be put to shame. Marduk filled with terror. Hebraic parallelism there. So Bel, Marduk, same. Okay. Its idols will be disgraced and her images will be shattered. Right? With that, let's turn to the text. So, kind of like a little Agatha Christie sort of thing going on here. When King Astyages was laid with his fathers, Cyrus the Persian received his kingdom, and Daniel was a companion of the king and was most honored of his friends. Now, the Babylonians had an idol called Bel, and every day they spent on it 12 bushels of fine flour and 40 sheep and 50 gallons of wine. The king revered it and went every day to worship it. So there's a temple dedicated to Bel, and that is the amount of food or the amount of animals which are slaughtered there, which Bel consumes. So the question is, all these animals are slaughtered, right? Who's eating it? Because, right, we know that there isn't some invisible God eating it, right? And so, I mean, that didn't happen at the Jerusalem temple. I mean, the sacrifices were burned, and the people, depending on the sacrifice, the people and the priests may have ate of it. Okay? But, yeah, so here you have this, and so who is a good ruler and king for his people? Well, Cyrus, right? Because he's doing what a leader should do concerning the gods of his land, right? So this is kind of typical for, the typical view that there's a God over your particular territory, and of course you want to honor him, or bad things might happen. Okay?
So do we ever find out who ate all that?
Well, that's part of the mystery, right? So Cyrus, we know who he is from history. But so what did King Cyrus do related to Bel every day? Well, he made an offering. Okay, so which if he didn't really believe in Bel, he didn't let anybody know, because he was doing all the stuff a true believer would be doing. Okay, so we'll just look at his actions and say it looks as if he really believes in Bel, and that these things, these food items that the god is consuming. Okay, so but Daniel, he's an oddball, isn't he? Because he doesn't believe in the Babylonian gods. So he's going to think, well, hey, now wait a minute. I know Bel isn't really eating it. Okay? So, hence the next bit of action here. But Daniel worshipped his own God. And the king said to him, "Why do you not worship Bel?" He answered, "Because I do not revere man-made idols, but the living God who created heaven and earth and has dominion over all flesh." This is not Nebuchadnezzar. So remember, Nebuchadnezzar died, and then whatever, the other guy took over, and then he ends up being basically done away with. And now we have Cyrus, who is now the main king. So there isn't this long track record of Daniel and the emperor, okay? The king said to him, "Do you not think that Bel is a living god? Do you not see how much he eats and drinks every day?" Then Daniel laughed and said, "Do not be deceived, O king, for this is but clay inside and brass outside, and it never ate or drank anything." So he's referring to the figure of Bel, right? So, and the king really knows that the figure of Bel is not really Bel itself, but represents him, okay? But Daniel's basically saying it might as well be, okay? So, then the king was angry, and he called his priests and said to them, "If you do not tell me who is eating these provisions, you shall die." Nobody likes Daniel. Oh, I mean, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure this one out, right? "But if you prove that Bel is eating them, Daniel shall die, because he blasphemed against Bel." And Daniel said to the king, "Let it be done as you have said." Okay, so from what we could tell, the king does believe in Bel, and he's going to his priest and saying, "Hey, So this is almost like, if you remember, like Elijah and the prophets of Baal, right? So it's something, not the exact same thing, but it's something similar, where there's going to be kind of a showdown and what's going to happen, right? And so, but Well, it's even so. It's Daniel is playing against the home team here. So, in that sense, he is at a bit of a disadvantage, right? But there's more to this than we realize. Okay? So, and there's some Old Testament. This is from Isaiah 44. A person can use a cedar tree to make a fire. He takes some of it and warms himself. Yes, he kindles a fire and bakes bread. But he also fashions a god and worships it. He makes an idol from it and bows down to it. Half of the wood he burns in the fire over its embers. He roasts his meat. He eats his roast and is full. He warms himself and says, "Ah, I am warm in front of the fire." From the rest he makes a god, his idol. He bows down, worships and prays, "Save me, for you are my God." So Isaiah is kind of getting into how is it that we have idols when we know, right, that it is something from creation. Okay. Well, shall we continue? Okay. So let's see what's going on behind. The temple here is not the Jewish temple. This is the temple for Bel, right, in Babylon. Now there were 70 priests of Bel besides their wives and children. And the king went with Daniel into the temple of Bel. And the priests of Bel said, "Behold, we are going outside. You yourself, O king, shall set forth the food and mix and place the wine and shut the door and seal it with your signet." So the king's going to do his offering, and then the temple's going to be sealed. Sounds like a pretty good thing, doesn't it? And when you return in the morning, if you do not find that Bel has eaten it all, we will die. Or else Daniel will, who is telling lies about us. They were unconcerned, for beneath the table they had made a hidden entrance, through which they used to go in regularly and consume the provision. So okay. When they had gone out, the king set forth the food for Bel. So it's kind of like you're playing, I don't know, you're playing a game or whatever it is, and you know what the cards are going to be. I don't know. Or you're debating and you have the debate questions ahead of time. Or whatever it may be, right? So they're doing all this stuff, but they know something the king doesn't. They know something Daniel doesn't or shouldn't know. Okay? So right now, who's set up to lose? Daniel. So everything's set up so he will lose, because the priests know about this extra this access to it, so they could go in there and they could take all the food and take it away, and well, it looks like Bel ate it because it's not here, and you sealed the temple, right? So it looks like things will not go well for Daniel. Okay, so let's see what happens. Early in the morning the king rose and came, and Daniel with him. And the king said, "Are the seals unbroken, Daniel?" He answered, "They are unbroken, O king." As soon as the doors were opened, the king looked at the table and shouted with a loud voice, "You are great, O Bel, and with you there is no deceit, none at all." Which means that when he opened the door, what did he see? Right, the food and all that was gone. Okay, maybe there was a crumb, who knows? But, right? So in other words, well, it certainly looks like Bel came and ate it. And if it was sealed, how else could it have happened? Okay, so the king didn't come to a crazy conclusion, because he's operating on the idea that the only way in and out of the temple are through its doors, not through some hidden entrance. So, wow. I wonder what the priests do. I don't know. They probably use it for other things too. Well, so Daniel should be in deep trouble. Let's see what happens. Then Daniel laughed and restrained the king from going in and said, "Look at the floor and notice whose footsteps these are." What? So the system was rigged, but somebody came along and unrigged it, because he said, "Look at the floor." So the floor must be giving a clue, right? So, look at the floor and notice whose footsteps these are. The king said, "I see the footsteps of men and women and children." Then the king was enraged, and he seized the priests and their wives and children, and they showed him the secret doors through which they were accustomed to enter and devour what was on the table. Therefore the king put them to death and gave Bel over to Daniel, who destroyed it and its temple. Okay. So what did Daniel do? Right? Because he had to do something that let the king know that people were walking around. Okay. So he basically what? Said, "The gig is up." Or is it the jig? I don't know if it's the jig or the gig. Whatever, right? So, yeah. Well, if we turn to, on the flip side of page 4, Paul kind of goes into Romans chapter 1 a little bit about idolatry, so on and so forth. So, though in the New Testament, Paul kind of branches out and includes idols belonging to things that are not literally idols, right? And so, which is appropriate, because today, if we were to say, what are the idols that people worship, we would be using that term figuratively, wouldn't we? In other words, somebody has a god in his life, and it's not a literal, well, almost probably not a literal idol, but something that he what? Values more than God. That's all an idol is, right? So, as Luther teaches, we should fear, love, and trust in God above all things. So, an idol would be something that we fear, love, or trust in more than God. Which means there's a whole lot of idols going on in the world, right? For a whole lot of people. Sometimes even Christians. Because we get caught up in something and we're placing our trust, right? So, well, let's continue on. Okay? So let's, this is page 4. We're going to finish really early today. I mean, super early. I'm just like, you know how long this stuff takes to prepare? This is crazy. I need to quit. Okay. Anyways, so, and I just referenced some, the portion of Bel and the serpent contains 3 sections, etc., 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 okay? So, the 3 sections link to the first portion, vindicating Daniel in his worship by verse 28. He has destroyed Bel and slain the dragon. Let's read this, okay? There was also a great dragon, which the Babylonians revered. And the king said to Daniel, "You cannot deny that this is a living God, so worship him." A little bit of a, like, what's going on here? Okay? Daniel said, "I will worship the Lord my God, for he is the living God. But if you, O king, will give me permission, I will slay the dragon without sword or club." The king said, "I give you permission." So this is some other kind of thing going on here. Okay? It seems just a little bit disjointed. Okay? But there's another showdown. Okay? So what's going on here? Okay, other than we can say, oh, well, it comes across as a little disjointed in the text. But what is the purpose of this? The purpose is to kind of confront these things and to say, who is the real God? So this is what Daniel is doing. Okay? So he's challenging kind of the Babylonian infrastructure, whom they consider to be their gods. And these challenges aren't the best. I mean, they look like they could do Daniel in. Okay? But, so, then Daniel took pitch, fat, and hair, and boiled them together and made cakes, which he fed to the dragon. The dragon ate them and burst open, and Daniel said, "See what you have been worshiping." So, what's happening here is a real kind of animal. And so, well, if it's a god, then if I feed it this stuff, it should be okay. Right? But, it makes you wonder, because you go, well, in India, don't they worship, depending on your religion, you could see cows as, right? And you go, well, if you fed them something weird, they know that they could die. So, but, okay. When the Babylonians heard it, they were very indignant and conspired against the king, saying, "The king has become a Jew. He has destroyed Bel and slain the dragon and slaughtered the priests." Going to the king, they said, "Hand Daniel over to us, or else we will kill you and your household." The king saw that they were pressing him hard, and under compulsion, he handed Daniel over to them. They threw Daniel into the lion's den. See? So where does the Greek text show us why Daniel ends up in the lion's den? There's there's religion involved, but it's a lot more political stuff going on, right? I mean, Daniel has upset the apple cart. And you're no longer a loyal Babylonian. So the king is kind of losing his credibility as the king because he's allowed a Jew to best him. Okay? So, in a sense, this isn't purely a religious thing. This is a church and state thing mixed together, which is not weird, because we're about the only nation in the world, well, modern nations, but we were like the first one in the world that, in a sense, separated those things. But, yeah. So, there you have it. So, you can kind of see the context, okay? So, and that's the backstory, right? What else is going on? Because when you read the Aramaic text, you go, okay, but at least in the back of my mind, I'm thinking there's something else going on. Because why are they doing this to get Daniel? Because in a sense, they don't really care, right? I mean, I'm sure there's a few, but most of them don't really care. They just see him as a threat to their authority, and they want him gone, which is how power works, right? So, okay. So we'll want to flip the page. Okay. So here we have all this stuff going on. Okay. And then I asked some questions and whatnot. So page 5, I reference a little bit of Habakkuk. So there'll be some good stuff here, but at the very tail end, it'll tie in even better and in a strange way. So don't think I'm completely wonky here by bringing in Habakkuk, okay? So we know Habakkuk is one of the minor prophets, right? So, yeah, okay. So he lived in the 6th century BC, and so, it has stuff from that era, okay? So in this episode, we see how God provided for Daniel when he was in the lion's den. Okay. Now the prophet Habakkuk was in Judea. He had boiled pottage and had broken bread into the bowl, and was going into the field to take it to the reapers. But the angel of the Lord said to Habakkuk, "Take the dinner which you have to Babylon to Daniel in the lion's den." So this is the Greek text bringing Habakkuk in. Okay? Habakkuk said, Sir, I have never seen Babylon, and I know nothing about the den. So here, he's supposed to bring stuff to Daniel, right? So Daniel doesn't starve. So, so this is pretty good stuff, okay? So this is what Habakkuk's supposed to do. Then the angel of the Lord took him by the crown of the head, lifted him by his hair, and set him down in Babylon, right over the den, with the rushing sound of the wind itself. Okay? Then Habakkuk shouted, Daniel, Daniel, take the dinner which God has sent you. And Daniel said, Have you remembered me, O God, and have not forsaken those who love you? So Daniel arose and ate, and the angel of God immediately returned Habakkuk to his own place. Okay. So, by his hair, what's the deal with that? So Ezekiel also mentions the same occurring to him. He stretched out what appeared to be the hand and took me by the hair of my head. Then the Spirit lifted me up between the earth and heaven, and visions of God, and took me to Jerusalem. So this is a weird expression in English, but we find it elsewhere in Scripture. So Daniel is cared for and provided for. Okay? Let's see what else happens. Okay? So this is not exactly, it doesn't exactly match the Aramaic text, does it? So it's kind of giving us other information. Okay? And so this will tie into when we hear what Luther says about this, okay? Okay. So on the seventh day, the king came to mourn for Daniel. Why would the king do that? Well, he should be dead, right? So he's in the den, okay? And so if it wasn't for God's provision, he would be dead, okay? When he came to the den and looked in, there sat Daniel. And the king shouted with a loud voice, You are great, O Lord, the God of Daniel, and there is no other besides you. And he pulled Daniel out and threw into the den the men who had attempted his destruction, and they were devoured immediately before his eyes. Okay. So the story is basically the same, but it doesn't match up exactly. Okay, we get other information as to kind of what's happening and what's at play as to why Daniel is there, how long he is, etc., etc. But the result is the same in that the king is astounded, right? Calls Daniel out, recognizes God. Okay. So what the text does here in the Greek is it's using the same terminology where Cyrus referred to Bel as great, and now he's referring to the Israel God, Yahweh, as great. Okay? And so he says, Cyrus exclaims, You are great, O Bel, with you there is no deceit, none at all. Now he exclaims, You are great, O Lord, the God of Daniel, and there is no other beside you. So now he says, oh, okay, this is the real God. Okay? So I'll just share with you when I first read Bel because it was a long time ago when I first read it, and I don't know if I read it in a different translation, but the translation that I remember reading is that he dusted the floor with a little bit of flour, so that way, and so when the priests came out at night, they couldn't see it because it was dark. Okay, and so, but it was enough where you could see footprints, and that was kind of what did it. So the thing is, he sneaked in and put flour on the floor. Okay, but so that's kind of, as I remember the very first time I kind of read it, that's the kind of the memory that kind of sticks into my mind. Okay, so what value does this bring? Because it's not part of the original text of Daniel. We don't know how accurate it is. The historical figures are there, We know Daniel was thrown into dead. We don't know if everything happened as this text says. Now, my hunch is that this text is really bringing out the main story as to other things that were going on. Because it kind of makes sense that there were other political things going on where people wanted to do Daniel in. That just makes sense to me. And so this kind of fills in the blank. So, in that sense, to me, I think it has enough going for it to say it's reasonable. I wouldn't say it's 100% accurate because we don't know. Okay? But but it includes information that the Greek translators of the Old Testament saw fit to include it. So right there you have to go, they thought that it had value. Okay? So for that reason, I would say it's worth reading and has value. Okay? I don't know how far to take that because it's not part of the original text. And so if we're going to plant a flag down somewhere and go, well, what's the inspired word? We're going to go, the original text that was written, right? I mean, that's where we would go. So, okay, so what's the original? Well, the original text John wrote. Well, we don't have that. But we have enough manuscripts and everything else to have a really good idea of what he wrote, because we're able to kind of piece together the thousands of manuscripts, and we know their dates, and there's a whole lineage of copying and everything. So it's not as if we have to worry like, oh, well, the New Testament we have is really corrupted. I mean, it's not. Okay? And then the few places where there are differences, they're quite minor. Okay? So we don't have that for this, not to the same level. Okay? Because the Septuagint put Daniel, it's in the Greek language Old Testament translation, but the one that the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholics use is not the actual Septuagint version, which makes it even more muddy. Okay, so I think we have to kind of keep this. I mean, even if you want to kind of study the apocryphal books, the ones in Daniel, we even have to kind of set farther afield because it's even more of an outlier. Okay. But it has value because I think it gives us information that helps fill in the blanks, and it helps us understand the Aramaic text better. Does that make sense? So, okay. Relevancy, okay? So, so what I basically wrote is the Jews back in Babylon, they were a minority. Christians are a minority in the world. Now, Christianity is the largest religion in the world. If you count up all the people who belong to various religions, but we're still a minority. There is no religion that has a majority of followers. Okay, so we're just the largest minority of people who belong to a particular religion. Okay, so in that regard, is how do we remain faithful when there will be pressure on us to conform? And that's more and more of a valid question, right? Because we're kind of living in a day where the expectations for us to conform are kind of becoming a little more strident, okay? And where some in our culture are actually calling parts of Christianity hateful or bigoted or whatever it may be. Whereas before, if people thought it, they didn't say it, okay? So now we're kind of living in a different world. So we need to figure out how to be faithful, but there's no need to be a jerk either, right? So let's be faithful. Let's faithful to our beliefs, faithful in confessing it. But I think we should do it in the best way possible without compromising what we believe. Okay? Let's have Luther's tie-in, and then we'll call it a early morning. Okay? So, this is what he wrote. Here follow several pieces which which we do not wish to translate and include in the prophet Daniel and in the book of Esther. So he's talking about, because he did an entire translation of the Bible, and he's saying, I don't really want to include this in the Bible, but I kind of have to, because everyone knows that this is part of the Bible, or at least they consider it to be so. So I'm going to do it. So here he's saying, I don't want to translate these parts of Daniel, and I don't want to translate Esther, because he thought Esther was nonsense, because Esther doesn't really mention the name of God. So I mean, Luther had some fairly strong opinions, okay? So we have uprooted such cornflowers because they do not appear in Hebrew versions of Daniel and Esther. And yet, to keep them from perishing, we have put them here in a kind of special little spice garden or flower bed, since much that is good, especially the hymn of praise. Okay, that's the song of the three young men he's referring to. Okay, to be found in them. So he said, I like this hymn, which is giving praise to God, but the other stuff. So what he means, he's saying that we're putting it in this special little spice garden. What he means is that the books that he didn't like in the Old Testament, he separated and put at the back. He changed the order, put in the back, and an appendix, and didn't number it. That's the little spice garden that he did. Okay? So he did that with the New Testament too, the books he didn't like. So in that regard, Luther was kind of radical. He didn't remove any books, but he let everybody know what he thought of them by where he placed them, and in an appendix without numbering them. So, right? I mean, it's pretty obvious. Kind of brash, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. But the text of Susanna, and I think we're going to go over the text of Susanna, because that's a good one. Oh man, you have to. Yeah. Of Habakkuk and the dragon. So, it's unclear if he's talking about Habakkuk or Habakkuk as it appears in, right? So, but he says Habakkuk and the dragon seem like beautiful religious fiction, such as Judith and Tobit. Well, Judith and Tobit are religious fictions, and they're written in such a way where the reader should know because things, if you were to read it, things are so changed that you know it's not meant to be considered historical. So in other words, those are two books that should be read as a parable. Okay, so what he's saying is true. They are fiction. But at the same time, you'd go, well, Jesus' parables are fiction, right? But we don't want to say that, even though it's true. Why don't we want to say Jesus' parables are fiction? Because fiction kind of comes with the idea of it's not true. Yeah, the story's not literally true, but the message is. Okay? So, yeah. And I would say Tobit and Judith they do have a good message. Judith is even wilder. So, yeah. So, yeah, anyway. Have you guys ever read Judith? Oh, man. Yeah, that's a good one. And Tobit just has some weird stuff, but Judith, wow, man. So you got to go, well, so basically everybody who's named Judy, go back far enough, it goes back to Judith, who was, wow, one serious woman, I'll tell you. Okay. So, for example, Susanna means rose lily, that is, a nice, pious land and folk, or a group of poor people among the thorns. Daniel means a judge, and so on. Be the story as it may, it can all easily be interpreted in terms of the state, the home, or devout company of the faithful. So Luther's saying it does have value because, right, I think he's a little glib myself, because we have to remember that, we're on this train, right? And this train goes back to Jesus. It's not to say that weird things haven't been put on the train or things haven't happened, but we need to be respectful in the sense that, you really need to be sure that something is the case before you kind of go off like this, right? And so, it'll be a few generations before our Lutheran fathers actually kind of go in that some of the direction Luther does, because the first couple generations after Luther, they don't kind of do that. Okay, so though it ends up kind of happening de facto. So that's the text of Daniel. It has value, but the Lutheran Church does not consider it canon. Okay, and what canon means is that which we use to what? Use as the standard or norm, and we don't. But that doesn't mean that we haven't read those books in church or used them because they had value. And so, and we still to this day have that in our hymn book, the Song of the Three Young Men. That's it. Next week we'll go back to the Aramaic text. We'll pick up as to what the Aramaic text says about Daniel going into the lion's den, so on and so forth. And it primarily gives a religious-only picture. Okay, whereas this one kind of brings in a lot of the civic stuff going on.
I haven't talked to Kevin yet, but the church council is going to move our meetings from the multi-purpose room to the fellowship hall.
Okay.
Purely for an economic reason, and that is it's expensive to cool this huge building down.
Oh, okay.
Can we move this group to the fellowship hall? We've
Sure.
got a kitchen there.
Sure.
Kevin, can you
Yeah.
do the YouTube and everything?
I'll tell you why we moved.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just asking.
Oh, yeah, sure. But I'll tell you, the reason why we moved is because it was disturbing people who would come in early to get coffee.
Well, that and the fact that we had 26, 28, 30 people.
Well, yeah, we did. It was more.
Didn't have any space sit around the table hardly.
But right now we can set up for the
Oh, yeah.
people to come.
Yeah, I mean, now it's so, yeah.
Can we do the YouTube if the Bible class was held in the fellowship hall?
I don't think there's any equipment up there to do recording.
Hmm.
There's no equipment in that room to do any recording right now that I know of.
Could you do an audio if I just wear the mic that we use for the church service, or would that?
Yeah, probably.
I'm just
Oh,
asking,
yeah.
but, you know, it's expensive to cool this, it's very inefficient. For 7 or 8 people who really don't need this building. That would be a much cozier
Yeah.
place.
Yeah, and I don't, yeah. So, I mean, but there was, a few people who would come in and get coffee, and they're like, hey, you're interrupting our coffee thing before the church service. So,
I mean, the kitchen's there, they can walk
oh,
around.
it just,
You're here and you want coffee, sit down.
well, yeah, but people wanted to have coffee and not have to listen to Sunday school. So, yeah. But
I mean, we'll have voter
Sure.
meetings in here, obviously.
just however it works, that'll be fine. Yeah. So,
Can we try that next week? Would that be a problem, Kevin? Okay. Let's
sure.
try her next week,
Okay.
and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Yeah. Okay. So, let's close with prayer, and we'll. Yeah. Our Father, the story of Bel and the snake. There's a lot of stuff going on in there, and I have read it and I have studied it. I'm not 100% sure what to make of it. And yet at the same time, you have seen fit somehow that it is in the periphery of our scriptures. And I want to honor it in that way and to see if there is something of value that we may learn. May we do so, but always focus on what we can learn about you and how we may be faithful to what you have given us to confess and how to live. In our Savior's name we pray. Amen.